The US unilaterally began the war on Iran on the 28th of February, and soon claims of victory and pure domination were made by the US president. Congress in the US may assess need to adjust US operational tactics, be it Trump's speeches or Truth Social posts, and references of Iran's Air Force and Navy being obliterated. They were repeatedly made. Now, a new congressional report says, after all those claims of obliterating Iran, this new congressional report, it says 42 US aircraft were lost or damaged during Operation Epic Fury. The US congressional report, it lists 42 aircraft, including drones, that were damaged or lost in active combat. Here's the list. 4 F-15E Strike Eagle fighter jets, 3 F-15Es. They were destroyed by friendly fire over Kuwait, and this happened within the initial days of the war. The 4th F-15E was destroyed inside Iran, where both aircrew ejected separately, leading to an intense search and rescue operation involving hundreds of troops and tens of fighter jets. Then the A-10 Thunderbolt II ground attack aircraft. This was damaged during the search and rescue operation for that F-15E pilot, and this was to recover the airman who was stuck inside Iran. In that same operation, 2 MC-130J Commando IIs. These were intentionally destroyed by the US forces themselves on the ground in Iran during a rescue operation after they were unable to depart. Then a 1HH-60W Jolly Green II helicopter. It sustained damage from small arms fire inside Iran during that same rescue operation. Then 1 F-35A Lightning II stealth fighter. It was damaged by Iranian ground fire, and this makes it the first case of this unkillable F-35 stealth jet that was being locked, and it was then hit by Iranian forces. US lost 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones in this action in those 40 days, and they've been lost since the start of the war against Iran. US also lost 7 KC-135 Strato tankers. These are aerial refueling aircraft. 2 of them were damaged in friendly airspace, while 5 were damaged while they were on the ground at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And that air base is a critical US military hub. US lost 1 E-3 Sentry AVAX. That's an airborne early warning and control system. It lost it. It was damaged while being parked on an unprotected taxiway at a critical US military hub in Saudi Arabia. US also lost 1 MQ-4C Triton high-altitude long-endurance drone, which crashed to the ground. Now, apart from the above, explosive reports from the US, they analyzed satellite imagery and they claimed that the US took far more hits during the war than were reported. At least 228 US structures and equipment were damaged across US West Asia bases from Iranian missiles and drones. US hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft and key radar communications and air defense equipment, all of it, nothing was safe from Iranian hits. Now, the congressional report mentions how the US Congress may assess whether these losses show changes in the threat environment or in Iranian capabilities, and whether there is a need for US to rework its war strategy. So as the US now comes to terms with realities of the battlefield, did US President Trump exaggerate Iranian destruction while downplaying US losses? To discuss this further, I'm now introducing my guest, Jane Kininmont, CEO, United Nations Association UK, joining me from London. Jane, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time. Let's start right off, Jane. If Iran was obliterated, if its nuclear program, its air force, its navy, it was gone, if US had won, how did US end up losing 42 aerial assets? That's a massive number, and take such severe damage on its regional bases. Over to you.
Well, it has often been said that the first casualty of war is truth. And clearly, in any war, the sides tend to use a lot of exaggeration and hyperbole. Let's remember that 1 year ago, the US and Israel fought the 12-day war with Iran. And at that time, Donald Trump said that a massive strike by the US on Iranian nuclear facilities had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. For some months afterwards, the US maintained that line. There was no need to deal further with Iran because they said the nuclear program had been obliterated. Clearly that wasn't true, because the nuclear program was again used as part of the justification for this year's much larger scale war, and indeed we are still hearing about the need to resolve issues over Iran's nuclear program. So yes, there is a lot of exaggeration. That said, 42 aircraft, it does include, as you mentioned, drones and uncrewed aircraft. The losses in terms of US soldiers being killed are still very, very low, and it is still a very asymmetric war where Iran has sustained much more damage than the US has. But at the end of the day, this is an existential war for the Iranian political leadership, and it's simply not an existential war for the US.
Jane, let me just quickly quote a line from that congressional report. Towards the end, in their remarks, they add, and this is regarding operational risk, they add that Congress may assess whether any changes to the threat signal the need to adjust US operational concepts, US tactics, or even US basing posture. Is US reconsidering its bases across West Asia because they've taken a massive amount of hits? Has US finally accepted the truth of the Iranian threat in the region?
Well, this will probably intensify debates about the future of the US military presence in the region, because there are different camps of opinion in Washington about this. For years now, going back to the Obama administration, there have been some in the US saying, what's the point of us having these bases in the Gulf? They're supposed to be there to ensure the free flow of oil, but if most of that oil goes to China, shouldn't China be responsible for that instead? And then there has been another camp in Washington basically saying we cannot allow China to replace us, we must act like a superpower and have these bases, etc. But I think you will see that debate intensify now, both because Americans question the value of the scale of presence that they have in the Middle East versus other places, but also because the Gulf states are now questioning, how are they going to guarantee their security in the future? This was not a war that most of those countries wanted. And of course, they have really unfairly paid a price for it, as Iran has lashed out and hurt them and hurt their economies. Now, there's different views in the Gulf. It seems that the UAE wants to double down on its relations with the US and Israel. That's what it's saying at the moment, and it's very frustrated with a number of other Arab countries. But other Gulf states are wondering, how useful is it to have this US presence, and should they rather try to form more of a sort of Sunni Muslim bloc and ensure their security more locally?
No, I hear your point, but on UAE, let me come to you with that, Jane. US regional partner, UAE, they've been a strategic partner and extremely important to the US also regarding the Abraham Accords. But UAE has been on a blitz in the last month and a half to upgrade and even diversify its air defenses, which have largely relied on US THAAD and Patriot PAC-3 batteries to secure its skies so far. Now, UAE has now looked towards Ukraine for air defenses. They've signed a new defense cooperation agreement with France, and they've even fast-tracked deployment of the Israeli Iron Dome to secure against Iranian threats. What does that say about UAE's trust on American air defenses to secure them?
Well, all of the Gulf states clearly see a need to diversify their alliances beyond the US, and that's quite a long-standing issue. And definitely everyone has become more concerned about US reliability as an ally when this is a US administration that has questioned the value of basically all of its alliances and partnerships, including those with NATO. So it makes sense for the UAE to look elsewhere. And they have also talked about using some of their sovereign wealth to invest in defence industries to help ensure that they do have that ongoing supply. At the same time, they also need de-escalation in the region, because their economic success does depend on the confidence of international investors, companies, tourists and talent coming to that part of the world. So they do also have an interest in getting to a more stable situation.
Jane, finally, let me also get your thoughts on this. Before this war was started, there were reports and there was advice given to the Trump administration simply saying, don't do it. Don't take that step against Iran. don't get involved. You've had your armada in place. Even the Gulf nations, they gave an assessment to the US that they face a severe threat of Iranian missiles. And that's exactly what we saw happening over the course of the next 2 months. And these reports came before February 28th. Feb 28th onwards, until the ceasefire was announced, we saw all Gulf nations taking immense amount of strikes, diminishing in nature, but still they were able to penetrate, and the number of bases of the US itself in West Asia also taking a good number of hits. When you put all of this in one background, along with this failing and fractured US foreign policy, with none of their allies, including NATO, wanting to get involved, how do you see US wanting to restart hostilities with Iran? Because that is a messaging which is continuing to come from Donald Trump.
I think that the US is currently uncertain about what it wants. Clearly, they had expectations and started a war, a little bit like Russia started its war in Ukraine. Superpowers sometimes start wars thinking, we're big, we're strong, our opponents are weak, and therefore this war is going to be easy. And then they find out that things are not, in fact, so simple, and they can't end wars as soon as they started them. There are reports in the New York Times overnight that the US had the idea that they would try to bring back former President Ahmadinejad in Iran in a kind of supposed Venezuela scenario. Excuse me. So it's now unclear what they would actually gain from further war if regime change is not going to be so easy.
Jane, thanks so much, and have a glass of water. There will be more to discuss, and we will have you on the show once again, because this only seems to be getting murkier, with no clear conclusion in sight and no clear plan that comes across from the statements that we're constantly hearing coming in from the US. That was Jane Kirimon joining us from London.